They're everywhere! A Highlander gasped as bullets whistled through the underbrush at Bushy Run in 1763. Bouquet's force, reeling from Pontiac's rebellion after the French-Indian War, faced an invisible foe. Shawnee, Delaware, and Seneca fighters melting into trees, picking off redcoats like targets. No water, no mercy, just endless volleys and charges. What looked like defeat flipped with a bold trap, scattering the attackers. Yet this triumph exposed the colony's fragility, where one ambush could unravel an empire's edge. Terror swept the western frontiers of Pennsylvania, Maryland, and Virginia like a storm no one saw building. With native war parties striking settlements without warning, scalping families, torching harvests, and leaving nothing but ash and echoes. Refugees flooded into places like Carlisle, their stories a litany of burned homes and charred remains, hundreds fleeing in panic while the woods hid more stragglers with nowhere to turn. Estimates pegged 1,000 families displaced, the wilderness teeming with the homeless, and without swift action, western Pennsylvania faced total abandonment, a ghost land reclaimed by the forest. Only the Seneca and a handful of Cayuga from the Iroquois League joined the fight, having razed Venango and mounted a feeble siege at Niagara that lasted mere days before they melted back into the shadows. It was Pontiac's uprising in the wake of the French-Indian War, a rebellion that turned alliances upside down, where yesterday's trading partners became today's raiders, and the British, fresh from victory over France, found their forts crumbling under the weight of underestimated foes. The fear wasn't abstract. It clung to every settler like smoke from their ruined cabins, with war cries echoing through valleys that once promised prosperity. In this chaos, colonial authorities scrambled. But the native strategy hit hard, targeting isolated outposts and supply lines, forcing the British to confront a war of attrition on terrain that favored the ambush over the parade ground. Think of it as the 18th century equivalent of guerrilla tactics going viral, except the shares were in blood and the likes came from scalps taken as trophies. The Seneca's destruction of Venango wasn't just a raid, it signaled a broader discontent, a ripple from Pontiac's call to arms that exposed how thin the British hold really was, post-French defeat, where victory parades turned into desperate defenses overnight. Sir Geoffrey Amherst, the British commander-in-chief, grappled with a conflict that promised no glory, just headaches and hollowed-out regiments. The conquering forces from Canada disbanded or shipped home, leaving scraps of units weakened by disease and desertion. Colonel Henry Bouquet, a Swiss officer with battle scars from Sardinian and Dutch service, stepped into the fray as a reliable hand, known for his diligence, loyalty, and resourcefulness, free from the arrogance that plagued many peers, his first-hand knowledge of Indian warfare making him a scout in his own right when needed. Amherst initially dismissed the uprising as fleeting, a rash Seneca ploy, scoffing at reports from Fort Pitt on the 4th of June, convinced no post under proper command could fall to such wretched enemies, advocating strict obedience and merciless punishment for the savages to keep them in line. But as worse news rolled in from the west, Amherst conceded the affair was more widespread than anticipated, dispatching 2 companies from the 42nd and 77th Regiments to bolster Bouquet in Philadelphia, a reluctant admission that the frontier was unraveling faster than expected. Strategic clashes emerged between Bouquet and Amherst, with Bouquet urging the abandonment of small outposts like Venango and LeBoeuf to consolidate at Fort Pitt and Presque Isle, sparing lives and complications, while Amherst rejected it, fearing it would inflate native confidence and interpret any concession as born from fear rather than pragmatism. Amherst's fury boiled over at reports of the Detroit siege and murders of officers like Sir Robert Davers and Lieutenant Robertson, lamenting missed chances to eliminate chiefs during peace talks, pushing for unrelenting retaliation against their barbarous acts. In a grim twist, he queried Bouquet on spreading smallpox via contaminated blankets among the disaffected tribes, every stratagem fair game to subdue them, and Bouquet agreed to try it with blankets that might fall into their hands, both men endorsing a tactic that blurred warfare into extermination. By the 3rd of July, news of lost outposts at Presque Isle, LeBoeuf, and Venango hit like a gut punch, Bouquet lambasting the shameful surrender at Presque Isle and criticizing Lieutenant Blaine's near capitulation at Ligonier, highlighting how fragile defenses invited disaster in this post-French Indian War vacuum. The buildup felt like a powder keg with a lit fuse, Amherst's initial underestimation mirroring the Empire's overreach, where conquered lands bred resentment that no treaty could bury. Bouquet's pragmatic eye clashed with Amherst's rigid stance, a microcosm of colonial hubris, and their correspondence on biological warfare added a layer of irony, modern eyes seeing it as a precursor to darker tactics, yet back then just another tool in the kit for reducing the threat. As outposts fell, the march became inevitable, Bouquet assembling what forces he could amid a landscape where every shadow hid a potential end, the French-Indian War's echoes, demanding a response that would test the limits of endurance and ethics alike. Late June turned Carlisle into a refugee camp on steroids. Every fort building, house, barn, and shack crammed with settler families fleeing tomahawk terror, their eyes wide with stories of raids that left nothing standing. Bouquet called the scene a gut-wrench to humanity, impossible to paint in words, women and children half mad from loss, while the town swelled like a balloon about to pop. Cooperation? Forget it. Pennsylvania's government and frontier folk dragged their feet, leaving Bouquet to fume that he was abandoned by the very people he came to shield, supplies trickling in slower than molasses in winter. It was like organizing a rescue with everyone, too scared to show up, the French-Indian War's hangover making every delay a potential death sentence for outposts hanging by a thread. Fort Bedford, under Captain Louis Ecuyer, ran on fumes, just 3 corporals and 9 privates holding the line. Locals piling in for shelter during alarms, 93 families cramming in on the 3rd of June like sardines in a tin. By the 17th of June, villagers scattered, leaving Ecuyer with 12 Royal Americans and 7 Indian prisoners, only for raids to drag them back after murders and burnings lit up the horizon. Fort Ligonier fared no better, Lieutenant Archibald Blaine fending off of the 4th of June attack without wasting ammo, then a serious the 21st of June assault lasting 2 hours, repelled but leaving him cut off, all messengers scalped or shot. Communication lines snapped like dry twigs, turning these forts into islands in a sea of hostiles, where every rustle could mean the end, Pontiac's warriors exploiting the isolation that British arrogance had ignored. After 18 days of stalling, Bouquet kicked off with about 500 men, the cream of the 42nd Highlanders and remnants of the 77th, a force more gamble than guarantee, risk stacking higher than Braddock's massacre where casualties outnumbered Bouquet's entire crew. They pushed through ghost towns, Shippensburg, Fort Loudon, Fort Littleton, Fort Juniata, all abandoned or skeletal, hitting Bedford on the 25th of July for a 3-day breather, picking up Trenta locals en route. The path? General Forbes's old rutted trail hacking through forests, swamps, and steep Allegheny slopes, a slog that tested men and mounts alike. By the 2nd of August, they reached Ligonier, Indians vanishing like smoke as they closed in. The fort blockaded for weeks, but now relieved. Bouquet's advance guard of 30 Highlanders slipping in unscathed earlier, a small win in a game where every mile cost blood. At Ligonier, Bouquet ditched the oxen and wagons, the convoy's dead weight, betting on speed to dodge attacks, loading 350 pack horses with essentials and a few cattle for the push ahead. Turtle Creek loomed as ambush central, narrow gorges perfect for traps, so the plan locked in. March to Bushy Run stream by day, camp until nightfall, then blitz through the danger zone under cover of darkness. It was frontier chess, Bouquet moving pieces to outflank invisible opponents, warriors who knew the land like their own veins, post-French-Indian war tensions turning every creek into a potential grave, supplies streamlined, men primed, the column snaked out, eyes scanning trees that hid more threats than promises. Dawn on August 5 saw tents struck early, the column threading through rugged hills and deep valleys, forests stretching endless miles, a green labyrinth where visibility dropped to nothing. By 1 o'clock, 18 miles down and half a mile from Bushy Run's promised rest, rifle reports cracked from the front, escalating to a furious rattle mixed with whoops and yells. The advance guard locked in hot contact. 2 lead companies rushed forward, fire intensifying to reveal a large, determined force, halting the convoy cold. Troops formed up, charged with bayonets fixed, sweeping yelping attackers back and clearing ground, but relief lasted seconds before fresh volleys hit flanks and rear, chaos engulfing the wagons. It unfolded like a bad dream in slow motion, British discipline holding against an enemy that struck and faded, the forest amplifying every sound into nightmare fuel. Forced back to shield the panicked horses and wagons, soldiers ringed up in a defensive circle, raw to this bush warfare but steady under Bouquet's eye, trust in command, keeping panic at bay amid hidden foes and swirling confusion. Assaults rolled in waves, Indians charging from all sides with furious fire and mad yells, aiming to crack the line, met each time by precise volleys and bayonet pushes that drove them tree to tree, vanishing quick. Their agility saved most, while British, less versed in woodland scraps, took heavy hits, the fight grinding on for 7 hours, exhausting under relentless pressure. As dusk cloaked the woods, fire slackened, weary men grabbing breath, the day's toll etched in fallen comrades, and the realization that tomorrow promised more of the same brutal arithmetic. Night clamped down on a waterless hilltop camp, position locked by enemy presence, no shift possible without inviting slaughter, sentries and outposts layered thick while troops slept in battle order. 60 dead or wounded, including officers, piled up, a central space ringed by flour sack walls for the injured, shielding stray bullets as they lay parched, helpless spectators to fate. Thirst gnawed worse than wounds. Defeat meaning tomahawk horrors, victory no guarantee for transport if numbers swelled too high. Indians peppered the dark with shots. Whoops piercing the gloom like vengeful ghosts. Fires banned to deny snipers, targets. The camp, a black void where every shadow whispered ambush. Pontiac's shadow war turning rest into torment. Darkness settled over the hill like a reluctant truce, but Bouquet's men knew better than to call it peace, stuck on a dry knob where not a drop of water waited, enemy eyes pinning them in place like nails in a coffin. Shifting camp would have invited a midnight slaughter, so they dug in right there amid the day's debris. Sentries posted thick as thieves, outposts layered to catch any whisper of movement, soldiers collapsing into battle lines for whatever sleep they could snatch. It was the kind of night where exhaustion met paranoia. The forest, a black wall hiding warriors who had tasted blood and wanted more. Pontiac's uprising turning every rustle into a potential endgame for these redcoats far from home. Casualties stacked up to 60, officers included. A grim tally that turned the camp's heart into a makeshift ward. Flour sacks from the convoy piled into walls against stray bullets zipping through the gloom. The wounded lay sprawled on bare earth, throats burning from thirst that twisted like a knife, passive spectators to whatever dawn might bring, their moans blending with the wind. Failure here meant tomahawks finishing what rifles started, a fate that hung heavier than the humidity, while even victory offered no easy out. Too many broken bodies to haul without horses or mercy from the terrain. Think of it as colonial triage under starlight, where survival odds flipped like coins in the dark, the French-Indian War's echoes demanding payment in full. Indians kept the pressure on through the hours, sporadic shots cracking from the shadows, whoops slicing the air at intervals to remind everyone of the vengeance brewing just beyond sight. No fires lit the camp, too risky to hand snipers a glowing map of targets, leaving the whole setup swallowed in blackness, men navigating by feel and fear alone. It was psychological warfare dialed up, those yelps echoing like bad omens in a ghost story, warriors patient as predators waiting for the morrow's feast. Bushy Run already a name synonymous with siege in the making. Dawn broke with a chorus of screams ripping through the twilight mist, the Indians' standard opener for another round. Forests still cool and damp as the assault kicked off from every direction, warriors closing under tree cover for close, lethal shots. Charges came furious and frequent, just like the day before, met with volleys and bayonets that pushed them back. But the pressure built relentlessly, enemies vanishing only to reappear, their tactics a masterclass in hit and fade that wore down the British line. No standing firm for these fighters, always melting away before steel could connect fully. Pontiac's War showcasing mobility that turned the woods into a deadly maze, redcoats paying the price in sweat and lead. Bouquet's troops started ragged, the long march and yesterday's grind leaving them hollowed out, but thirst hit hardest. Commander noting it stung worse than enemy fire, men maddened by parched tongues under a climbing sun. They saw the game clear, attrition bleeding them dry against foes bold yet cautious, impossible to land a knockout blow, while warriors taunted in broken English, whoops escalating like insults. Horses stampeded in panic from the noise, bursting through lines and scattering into the hills. Drivers cowering in brush, ignoring orders in the bedlam. It mirrored modern chaos theory, one flap of panic unraveling the whole setup, frontier survival boiling down to who cracked first in this heat. By 10 o'clock, lines wavered thin, men dropping fast under the onslaught, Bouquet hatching a ploy to flip the script, boosting enemy cockiness to lure them into a clump for the kill. He pulled 2 battered companies inside the circle, flanks closing to mask the move like a faint retreat, warriors mistaking it for weakness and surging forward with yells and heavy fire, exposing themselves in the rush. Those retreating units looped around a dip thick with trees, slamming a point-blank volley into the crowd, dropping dozens, Highlanders following with bayonets and wild cries that shattered the assault. Another pair of companies ambushed the route with a second barrage, pursuit scattering the rest through the woods. No time for reloads or rally, silence falling as the last whoop faded. Bushy Run's tide turned in a stroke of frontier cunning. 60 native bodies littered the ground, some belonging to key chiefs whose absence would echo through their villages, a stark tally that British soldiers counted amid the haze of gunpowder and sweat. They captured just one warrior, executing him on the spot with the casual finality of putting down a trapped animal, no trial or mercy in that frontier code where survival trumped sentiment. British losses hit harder. 8 officers and 115 men gone over 2 days. A butcher's bill that outstripped the enemies despite the win, reminding everyone that victories in these woods came wrapped in their own kind of defeat. Think of it as colonial accounting, where bodies piled up like debts no one wanted to pay, the French-Indian War's shadow making every count feel like interest on an old loan. The column stalled to jury-rigged stretchers for the wounded and torch supplies too bulky to haul, most horses having bolted into the hills like they knew better than to stick around. By afternoon, they limped to Bushy Run proper, fending off a fresh native skirmish that scattered quick under-return fire. No real threat, but enough to keep nerves frayed. Next day, the push to Fort Pitt covered 25 miles under harassment, small raids nipping at flanks like persistent flies. Yet they rolled in on the 10th of August without major hits, the journey's end a quiet exhale after the storm. It played out like a bad road trip in 1763 terms, delays and detours turning triumph into a grind. Pontiac's fighters probing for weakness but finding steel instead. Relief washed over Fort Pitt like rain after drought, garrison and newcomers sharing a moment of hard-won quiet. The siege lifted just in time. Natives had ringed the fort from the 28th of July to the 1st of August, poised for a full assault that never came, pulling off to intercept Bouquet when word of his approach spread. On the 10th morning, warriors paraded past the walls with scalp yells and grisly trophies dangling, a taunt that backfired as the column crested into view hours later. Picture the irony, besiegers becoming the besieged in a flip of fate, the post-French-Indian War chessboard shifting pieces where one wrong move meant checkmate for isolated forts. Bushy Run ranked among the fiercest scraps between whites and natives, a 2-day meat grinder where edges blurred in the underbrush. Numbers favored the British if uneven, but warriors matched ferocity with grit that mirrored their foes' stubborn hold, no side claiming easy dominance in that tangled hell. Provinces buzzed with joy and awe, especially those grasping the nightmare logistics of Indian campaigns. Pennsylvania's assembly passing resolutions to laud Bouquet, while the king dispatched formal thanks soon after. It felt like 18th century PR, medals and motions papering over the mud and misery, a win that polished reputations without erasing the scars. Villages mourned deep, women shearing hair and slashing limbs in grief rituals that wailed for the fallen knives, drawing blood as echoes of loss. Surprise and discouragement hit hard, yet rage simmered too hot to quench. Border raids rolling on with undimmed fury, Pontiac's spark refusing to die in one defeat. Long-term, Fort Pitt stood secure, the victory's morale boost arming settlers with spine they might have lacked otherwise. Bouquet's stand a pivot that steadied the frontier against collapse. Bouquet's ploy at Bushy Run turned ambush into rout, saving Fort Pitt but stacking bodies on both sides. A post-French Indian War reminder that frontiers ate ambition whole. Natives mourned chiefs while British tallied costs, the clash exposing how fragile empires clung to contested dirt. For more on native legends that shaped history, subscribe to Native Legends and History Stories, hit like, and comment your thoughts below.